Outside beautiful sunshine and joining us this afternoon. Welcome to council and staff. I'd like to resume this regular council meeting of Monday, February the 25th, 2019. Is there any changes to the agenda from staff?
None from staff, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any from council? We will give you an opportunity at council statements, each person that needs to make a statement. Okay, seeing none, is there any disclosure of interest from council? Seeing none, we'll move on with our agenda. Item 5, confirmation of minutes to the regular council meeting of February the 11th. We have a motion.
Moved by Council Lavery, seconded by Council Wallace Richmond, that the regular council meeting minutes of February 11, 2019 be adopted as circulated.
Are there any questions or business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Moving to item 6, committee reports. Our first committee report is minutes from the Development Planning Services Committee of February the 19th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Lindgren, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of February 19, 2019 be received as information.
Is there any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, all is in favor? Thank you. 6.2, Greenways Liaison Committee meeting minutes of January the 10th. We have a motion.
Moved by Council Lavery, seconded by Council Lindgren, that the Greenways Liaison Committee meeting minutes of January 10, 2019 be received as information.
Thank you. Any questions or input to those minutes? Seeing none, all is in favor? Thank you. 6.3, Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes of February the 7th. We have a motion.
Moved by Council Lindgren, seconded by Council Flynn, that the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes of February 7, 2019 be received as information.
Any questions or business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Item number 8. Did you want to talk about item number 7? Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I wasn't sure. Columbia Shuswap Regional District update. I will pass that over to Councillor Flynn, who is our rep in the CSRD.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. And again, I will reiterate that I sometimes, along with our regular representation of Councillor Eliason, struggle with whether we should talk about the most recent meeting before we get the summary which has been provided, or wait till we get the summary. I think I'm going to speak before we get the summary on kind of 3 issues. One is Thursday was a regular council or board meeting of the CSRD, and probably the biggest item dealt with there was a motion, and it'll be detailed in the summary in 2 weeks, but I think it's important to bring up with regards to Area C and request to the provincial government after a year or 2 of consultation with the community to recommend to the provincial government funding to put towards looking more closely and with more detail at a sub-regional municipality, including Blind Bay, Sorrento, the commercial areas, and then the most dense population. And the fallback to that motion was 2 electoral areas. So either one of those will have significant impact on what the CSRD board looks like moving forward, and voting and representation there. So fairly significant move forward to ask the province and the minister to get involved. And really it's not surprising when you consider there's municipalities with 800 people or 500 people with a mayor and 4 councillors, and CSRD Area C is 8,500 people represented by 1 electoral area director. So what's interesting is how long it takes to even get to this stage. So more to follow, and there'll be more well presented details of what was talked about in the board summary. And then the last Thursday afternoon after the board meeting, and most of Friday, Councillor Lavery and I were involved in a strategic planning session with the CSRD. So they're looking at strategic plan and had 2 consultants in that have significant local government experience. And all I said was that one of the best things Salmon Arm did was develop a strategic plan that we can pull out, laminated when we're making decisions, that was based on input from the community and electorate and the elected officials. And I encourage them to actually come up with a final product at the end of all of this. So it was a busy 2 days.
Great, thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lavery, did you wish to add anything to that report?
I would just re-emphasize news we've already heard before, that a 6-stage building inspection process will start in Area C as of early March, and that is quite an important thing to do. Not all areas have that yet, but it's coming. So I think it's kudos to Area C for starting that.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lavery, because I spent 8-9 years at that table pushing and promoting building inspection. And it is slowly coming to all of the CSRD. And one of the interesting things is one of the priority items in the strategic planning discussion was the electoral area director for the Falkland, Deep Creek, Ranchero area put his stickers by building inspection for his area. So we're getting close to region-wide building inspection, which is a huge step in the right direction.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Lavery, Councillor Flynn, also Councillor Eliason, who are CSRD reps. And I think it's just fine to report now, and anything that in 2 weeks can be filled in. So thank you for doing that for us. We will now move to staff reports. I'll just have council note that we do need motions for each of these staff reports from the floor. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're supporting the idea at the start of the discussion, but you are saying you would move it to get it on the floor. So the first one is Director of Engineering and Public Works, Trans-Canada Highway Number 1 West 4-laning project, water main improvement, contribution agreement. You can see the motion proposed. Councillor Flynn would move it. Councillor Cannon will second it. I would ask for the motion to be read.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that staff be authorized to enter into an authorization and contribution agreement with the Ministry of Transportation for the works related to the Highway 1 water main improvements, and that the Mayor and Corporate Officer be authorized to execute the agreement, and that the 2019 budget be amended to reflect TCH water main improvements for $205,000 funded from the TCH West Water Reserve.
Thank you. I'd ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works to speak to us about the report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, as you know, we've been working on this project cooperatively with the ministry since 2012 in different phases of this project. This is in regards to the initial first phase of the project, which is the preloading and grading for the Salmon River Bridge section, and that extends from First Avenue Southwest to 30th, so essentially from the new Walmart development to the boundary of the Esconlith Indian Band. And the majority of the work, if I can get the CAO to put my screen on, I can show you a map here. It's a little easier to explain it. So this is the entire project. There's 3 phases being proposed by the ministry. Phase 1 goes through the First Nations property. Phase 2 is from 1st to 30th, and then first to 20th, and then the third phase is through Adams Lake, Indian Band, which is from essentially 17th to 5th. And the section that we're dealing with today is the preloading for the new bridge structure. So this arrow indicates where the old Salmon River Bridge is. This is the new bridge structure, and this shows the area that's going to be preloaded. So this is the first phase of the ministry's project. And as part of that, there is a water main, an existing city water main that runs along this blue line, and it feeds Glen Eden and area, as well as both First Nations bands, Adams Lake and Esconlith. So because of this, it's an old AC line, it has to be preloaded over top. So we're concerned that if they load material over top of the line, that it's going to break or so part of the plan is to relocate it and improve it, bring it up to today's code, and then also realign it. So the water main will not go along here anymore. It'll be diverted through here. And then there will also be a new water main that goes on the east side of the road, servicing the chicken farm and the other remaining farms. So that's the area that we're talking about. We've gone through the designs, we've looked at the cost estimates, and we feel that everything's appropriate in regards to the split. So the ministry is going to be paying for anything that relates to their preloading, and then the city will be responsible for any of the additional works. So we're looking, and we have an agreement formulated for this cost share. Now, the important part of this is that we've negotiated with the ministry that we'll get 1 year after substantial completion to repay. But as indicated in the report, we do have the funds in a reserve already, so we are in financial state to pay it whenever. So.
Great, thank you very much. I would open it up to any questions from council. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, and maybe just clarification around wording. The water main improvements which are directly related to the preloading will be paid for MODI, and those are the ones that are indicated in red?
No, Your Worship, the red ones are just where we're going to relocate the water main to.
Okay.
So the preloading area that's being affected is essentially this area here.
Okay.
So that's what the ministry is going to be paying for. These new lines are going to be the city's responsibility.
Okay. So it's kind of close to a 50-50 sharing based on where everything's being done. And I will vote in support of the motion. And we do have a year after the work is completed to pay. It says we have a reserve of 308 and we're spending around 205. That 100,000, is that expected to be used on other future works? And will we probably have to go to general taxation at some point?
Director of Engineering, Public Works.
Your Worship, yes, that's correct. So the 308 is money that we've been putting aside for this project specifically, because, as I said, we've been dealing with it for quite a while now, and we've foreseen what we're going to have to do in partnership with the ministry on the other phases. So this is a pretty major project, the water main, but in the other phases as they move forward, we're going to have to extend some lines, which is going to be our responsibility. So I can foresee us putting, or staff will be recommending that we put more money into this reserve as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any discussion on the motion? Okay, just before we vote for the motion, I'd just like to thank staff. I think it's underestimated the work that our staff has done with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure throughout this project, right from the very start. And we're getting into more detail now. These water mains are water mains that we would have to replace at some time in the near future. So it's an ideal time to replace them now when the work is being done. It actually saves us money. And we want to have them in the ground before the finishing product gets put on. So this is an exciting time for Salmon Arm. Things are happening out there. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to 7.2, award of carts and bins, RFQ for curbside collection program. I'll just wait for the motion to be put up on the screen. So Council, I know you've seen the motion in your package. Is there someone that would like to move that motion? Councillor Lindgren, second by Councillor Wallace Richmond. I'll ask staff to read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Lindgren, seconded by Councillor Wallace Richmond, that Council accept the quote of Peninsula Plastics Limited, doing business as Nova Products, for the curbside collection container contract for the curbside program in accordance with the quoted price, $187,582.50 plus taxes.
Thank you. And I'll ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is in regards to the new curbside collection contract that'll be rolling out this spring. In order to do this, we are going to be providing each household with one green food cart, one kitchen catcher, and one blue recycling bin. And so this was an RFP to acquire those particular items. We received 3 quotes on February 14th, and out of the three companies, the 2 higher ranked companies, we determined that Nova Products has the best product for us, and also it was under our estimated bids for our estimated budgets for this year.
Great, thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Flynn?
Sorry, hate to be the only one asking questions, but
It's okay, your questions maybe spur others on, so go ahead.
do we have, I know in the room over there, there's the samples. Can you tell me which ones were chosen, or are there samples of what we're buying just to bring in here possibly? Or does that matter?
I could go and get them for you, but they are in the room there. I
Are
can
they the
point them out.
medium-sized one?
Yes, the medium-sized food bin, and the kitchen catchers are virtually all the same.
Yeah.
And the blue bins, we're going with one of the larger bins
Okay.
that can actually hold approximately 1 recycling bag.
And this budget item, the final amount, is that for, it says 6,750 units. Is that enough for all the homes now plus extra for new homes, or how does that work moving forward?
It's enough to supply us for this particular contract. We'll have extras on hand for as new homes get built and get onto the system. So that will continue to come through our reserve process.
Okay. And the numbers seem a lot more, or a lot better than what we were budgeting. Is that, am I reading that right?
That's correct.
We found our last one. Thank you. Great job on those numbers compared to what we were anticipating.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you to the Director of Engineering, there was also talk that residents, if they felt the need, could buy additional bins. Will that price also be extended to the private sales of bins?
So the intent would be that if people were to have suites of some sort and they needed additional food waste bins, they can actually purchase more bins. And the blue bins, it'll be 1 per household, and then it'll be up to the household to buy additional bins, but not from the city.
I see, okay.
So the green bins and food waste will basically be sold through the city because it has to be identified as food
such.
waste. But the recycling, you can put out containers, additional containers as you want.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Lindgren.
My question's been answered. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for the Director of Engineering Public Works or comments? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. One final question. I know the program is to start July 1st. When will the bins be delivered, or people will pick them up, or did I miss that?
They will be delivered as part of the contract.
Okay.
So when the contract rolls out, I suspect that they'll probably do it pre-contract rollout
Yes.
because we'll need them. But that's the intent. We're still working on some of the logistics of that.
I see. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Just like to comment on a couple of items. First of all, it's been interesting to see the prototypes in room 100 and have a chance to look at them. I think the kitchen catchers are what you would expect, standard size, will fit nicely under the sink, and kind of daily or every second day take them out to the larger food waste carts that people would have in their garages. And I would note that schools have been doing this now for several years, where we have a food waste kitchen catcher in the classrooms, and they're taken out to the food cart once a week. And the food waste carts are plenty large, in my opinion, for composting. If you have more compost than that, you would have to have a commercial kitchen in your house pretty well. So there's lots of space, and they do roll very well, so that should be no problem. And I know that we did send out with the calendars a chart showing that dairy products and meat products and a whole list of things can be put into the compost. So that'll become clear as July 1st gets closer. And I'm delighted that after July 1st, we will no longer take a blue bag out to the curbside with our recycling in it. And so the irony of that will be gone, and we will take a bin out that will be reused. So all of those blue and white bags, or clear bags we see on the end of curbs on our recycling days will not be necessary. So I think it's a great step forward, and appreciate all the staff's work on it. The budget, as we are under budget, those monies are targeted for recycling, is that right, that particular budget?
It was targeted initially, the reserves that were built were targeted for improvements to the curbside collection program. Initially, we talked about implementing a natural gas vehicle, like having all of the garbage trucks become natural gas. But through the years of the program here, it was determined that that wasn't feasible. So that's essentially why those reserves were in place. So I guess you could say it was for recycling and additional improvements to the curbside collection program.
The actual fee of $101 remains the same in 2019, is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so I think it's quite a reasonable price to have this pickup throughout the year for $101 for each household, and I will certainly support the motion. Any other comments from council? Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, for the second chance. I had one more question that came up from all the discussion. So quite clear, the food waste containers, kitchen catchers, and recycling bins, one each is being provided. Garbage collection, are we eliminating plastic bags there too, and you can put it out in any type of garbage can, or do we still use plastic dark green bags for garbage?
Your Worship, our bylaw still requires that garbage is in bags. I think in the future we'll look at something different, but currently for the length of this contract, we will require that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. My article in the newspaper in a week, I think, whenever it goes in, says, yes, the one bag we have not been able to get rid of is the one that goes in the garbage can. But one bag is a lot better than lots of bags, so appreciate that question. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to 7.3, National Trade Corridors Fund Grant Application. We have a motion on the screen. We would need someone to move it. Councillor Lavery would move it. Seconder on that motion, Councillor Flynn. I'll ask staff to read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, second by Councillor Flynn, that Council authorize submission of a grant application under the National Trade Corridors Fund for the Ross Street Underpass project. Estimated cost $12.368 million plus applicable taxes.
Thank you. Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a rather unique opportunity that's presented itself to us. We were aware of this fund previously, but it was some of the undertakings were in regards to the Lower Mainland area for improving the ports, and then the second intakes later on were for northern communities. And so what's happening is the federal government is seeing a need for improving access to our ports. And initially, as I mentioned, the monies were gone mostly to improve the port areas, and now they're phasing out to look at the transportation nodes and methods of getting the goods and services to the ports. Back in 2017, we actually we met with the provincial Ministry of Transportation, and they were working on a transportation trade network analysis, and this was to determine where the problems were in the transportation system, whether that be rail, road, access by water, all of these different things. And during that process, that was essentially a year-long process, and they're just finalizing it now. But the city's Ross Street Underpass project was identified as one of the top 30 projects, an important project in regards to the province. That hasn't been published yet, but we're hoping that we can get a letter of support from the province in regards to this. So this is an opportunity to get 50% funding on our project. And I really strongly feel that it's important. I mean, if we can get 50% of a $12 million project, less the other funds that we've got supported from essentially the CP Rail and whatnot, there's still a good opportunity to get some money from this if we're successful. So we don't think it'll impact the timelines for our project. We're still going to move forward. And if there are outcomes that say that we won't be able to acquire funds that we've already started, well, that'll be fine. We might still be able to get some monies funded for it. So we're going to continue with this, and we're hoping that we can get council support for this.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Flynn.
Wow, good news, maybe. I definitely support this. I had asked if there was any other, after the referendum was approved, I had asked if there was any other opportunity to go back, and kind of had the feeling that we couldn't. And I'm hoping that the fact that the referendum was supported isn't a negative, but is looked at as a positive. So I'm very much in favor of this. Anything we can get from a new grant program that can help fund the underpass project is exciting news.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship, and I'm also very supportive of this effort. It's not a minor undertaking, though, to take on a grant proposal of this size. And staff will advise us if they're looking for letters of support from other bodies that we might be able to advocate for.
Yes, Your Worship, we actually, in the past, we had letters of support from EDS and other organizations, so there might be an opportunity for that as well if we need them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And those are my questions too about letters of support, making assumptions. So is our MP will be made aware of this, our MLA? I know CP Rail is here this afternoon, so we can, maybe they can sign on, sign on the dotted line, but and including CP Rail as well. So those are all as part of staff's plans?
Your Worship, in past grant applications of this nature, we have reached out to the MLAs and the MPs for support, and I think this was an opportune time for that as well. Great. So we'll advise them when the expression of interest goes in.
And my last question, I know that there is usually no funding available for projects already started, and you referred to that. Is it your sense that that is in place as well?
We'll see what happens with this. This is a unique opportunity, as I mentioned, and if we can get provincial support through the Transportation Trade Network analysis, I think we would have a pretty good chance of possibly being successful in the grant.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too was excited when I read this. What is the deadline to get it?
That's the other unique thing, Your Worship. There is no deadline.
I didn't see one on there.
So that gives us it gives us a lot more flexibility. Typically, when we get grant applications, we have to have them in within a month.
Yeah.
And so this one gives us a little more flexibility. I mean, we obviously want to make this a priority. Yeah. Because we want to get it in before this is across Canada, so we are competing with some large areas.
Oh, right on. That's really exciting. I think who wouldn't support that at this table?
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, thank you to staff. I'd like to say we're going to build the Ross Street underpass, regardless of whether we get this grant or not. But certainly if council authorizes this, I will be in contact with our MP tomorrow to ask for his support. I think we were disappointed that there was no coinciding federal grant with our Ross Street underpass application. And so now it looks like there may be a possibility. I don't think we can put the money in the bank by any means, but certainly we have a better chance if we apply than if we don't. So I will support the motion as well. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. 8.4, Shuswap Regional Airport Automated Weather Observing System Replacement Award. I need a mover for this motion. Councillor Cannon, seconder. Councillor Lindgren, thank you. I'd ask staff to read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, second by Councillor Lindgren, that council award the purchase of the Shuswap Regional Airport Automated Weather Observing system replacement at the price $27,375 plus taxes to Spencer Navigation Maintenance Limited, Calgary, Alberta, and that the city's purchasing policy be waived in procurement of these works and services to authorize the sole sourcing to Spencer Navigation.
Thank you. Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we refer to this as the AWAS, and this is a very important part of the airport's navigational system. It provides pilots with ongoing weather information. And we have been sort of band-aiding the existing system for many years, and the company that has been helping us with that is Spence Navigation Maintenance. And we are looking for a sole source award for the replacement of this system to Spence.
Great, thank you. Any questions or discussion by council on this item? Okay, what I can tell council as a member of the Shuswap Regional Airport Committee is we have been really taping and gluing together the present weather navigation item that we have out there. And so this is really necessary to ensure safe flight. It is a capital project and we have budgeted for it, and the commission has authorized the money. So appreciate your support on it. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. 8.5, Chief Financial Officer, Permissive Tax Exemption Policy number 7.15. Just wait for it to go up on the screen, the motion. Need a mover and a seconder for that motion. Councillor Lavery, thank you. Councillor Cannon, thank you for seconding. Have staff read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, second by Councillor Cannon, that policy number 7.15, cited as permissive tax exemption, attached to the staff report dated February 15th, be adopted as presented.
Thank you. Chief Financial Officer.
Excuse me, sorry. The current 3-year permissive tax exemption cycle is coming to a close, and we took this as an opportunity to review the current policy and application form. The last amendment to this policy was in 1998. The revised policy that's attached in your package details the eligibility criteria and procedures that are currently being followed and are in place, but it also clearly sets out the objectives and parameters under which council should consider applications for permissive tax exemptions. It also provides a fair and clear treatment and consideration for all applicants. Overall, the changes that are proposed in the policy do not materially affect council's intent with respect to eligibility.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for sending us out the old policy so we could do a comparison. Is there any questions around this revised policy? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Not so much on the revision as clarification now. The understanding is if you qualify for a permissive tax exemption, the City of Salmon Arm will pay the other taxation due on the property, such as hospital and school and library and...
Chief Financial Officer.
Your Worship, that's always been the practice.
Yes.
So that will continue.
Okay, and is it our understanding that that's the case in all or neighboring municipalities?
Yes.
That's a standard of practice, I see. And my other question is, often we'll hear from groups that, with whom we have a fee for service on an annual basis, reporting back. There's never been a practice to ask the groups that apply to present on a regular basis to share, in fact, that they are making a contribution to the community that the community finds worthwhile of the loss of revenue.
Your Worship, several of the policies that we reviewed of other communities had included that requirement in their policy, that at council's discretion and request that such organizations would come and give a presentation on their programs and services. So that's definitely something that can be added to this if that's council's wish.
Okay, I'll pass to Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks staff for the work on this, and I certainly support it. I just want to comment on, Your Worship, on a bit of a sidebar about permissive tax exemption. I think as we move forward in looking at a affordable housing strategy for the city, I'm hoping anyhow, the city will be presented with a number of policy options of how to put sustainability of affordable housing into the next X amount of years. And one of those is permissive tax exemption, and it's not in place here now, but we may be looking at it, I'm hoping we look at it down the line, for affordable, it has to be defined, rental accommodation where the city can step up and put a PTE to that. The benefit of it, as it stands right now, is that the province has indicated, at least the current government, that they would then pick up the other costs that we normally would pay if we did a permissive tax exemption for rental housing. So it's in a little ways it's out of that, and as Councillor Wallace-Richmond says, we grant an exemption to not pay us taxes, but then the city does have to pay all the remaining taxes under permissive tax exemption. For this rental initiative would share the weight of the city going into that. That's down the line. I'm hoping we're talking about this in a year and a half from now, when we have policy options in front of us. But and it's a sidebar to this one, but I certainly support the amendment.
Great, thank you, Councillor Lavery, for bringing that up. I was not aware of that, and that would be of great interest to us, I think. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and this is kind of a sidebar as well, and it's to Councillor Lavery as one of our SILGA reps. And I'm not sure why in my time as SILGA president on that board I didn't think of it, but when you look at who qualifies, it's almost always an organization, or it is always an organization that has significant value to the community for recreation, arts and culture, all of those things, and now possibly housing. Perhaps we should be doing a resolution through SILGA. It almost seems unfair that a lot of the organizations that get these exemptions are providing services that are considered the responsibility of senior levels of government, and yet if we provide them help, it costs us. Perhaps we need a motion or a resolution at SILGA or somewhere to say, if they're going to look at it for housing, why aren't they providing it for, why should we and our taxpayers have to pay the school and other taxes? So I'm glad to hear they're considering it for rental housing. To me, that's part of the affordable housing solution, but I'm not sure why we wouldn't be pushing for that to be through another mechanism, through SILGA, to not have to pay that to replace it. It doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks. One question through you to the Chief Financial Officers. Will the groups that are currently have a permissive tax exemption be made aware of the revisions?
So practice is once this has been approved, we actually mail out a new application form with instructions and a copy of the policy to all of the current holders. We make it available on the website and obviously down at the customer service as well. So they will have the full package going into the next cycle.
And do you mind terribly, through your worship, reminding us how many of these are there in the 20? Or
how many applications?
Or how many are granted? Is it?
Oh, there's quite a number because it's for each individual parcel number.
I see. Okay.
That they have to fill out an application
So it's
for.
dozens, not?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Any other comments from council? Okay, I'm wondering if there is an appetite on the part of council to amend the policy in the way described by Councillor Wallace-Richmond. We do, of course, see the written applications for permissive tax exemptions, and we go through those and we authorize them at a public council meeting. What we don't do is we don't, as it sounds like some other communities, we don't have those groups come before us and present to us all the good things they're doing in the community. It seems to me that might be a possible win-win in that we would learn more and the community would be more aware of what these groups are doing. I don't like the word permissive because it makes it seem like you're getting something for nothing, and it's absolutely not the case. So I would ask council just to ponder that. If we are going to make an amendment, it would be now. The idea is an interesting one. Councillor Flynn.
I guess my question, I'm not sure I would want to hear from all of the organizations every time they apply. I don't think that that's efficient with our time. And a lot of these are smaller organizations that having to come and present to council could be difficult for them to do. At the same time, I think perhaps the bylaw should be worded that council could request in situations them come forward and present their value to the community. But I'm not sure I would be in support of all of them having to come and present.
Okay, fair enough. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship, and through you, I would like to retain the option to do that. We do hear from many of them already. I certainly wouldn't expect that they all show up in line every year to tell us, or every 3 years. But I think it would be thoughtful and considered to make sure that that option exists to us.
Your Worship, we could include in the process section that council may, at its discretion, request that you come to present. Yeah, that's a small change.
Let's just see how the other councillors are feeling about it, and if it sounds like that's an idea, I would entertain a amendment. Councillor Lavery, you've passing presently? Okay. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, did you want to make an amendment, or I'll just ask staff if they feel the amendment's necessary. Chief Administrative Officer, if we want to make that change, should we formally make an amendment?
Change the policy.
Yes, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Can I go back to Councillor Wallace-Richmond, if you press your button again, and then Councillor Cannon, if you press yours, you'll be next in line. Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Your Worship, I would be prepared to make a motion to see that amendment added to the policy.
Okay, and just to be clear on the amendment, how would you like it worded?
That in the process section of the policy, a statement be added that upon request, council may ask applicants to present.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Flynn. Thank you. Councillor Cannon, speaking to the amendment.
Yeah, I would support that. I was thinking something similar to in the 3 years, maybe once in the 3 years they come and present, but I'd be fine if council can request if they want a presentation by a certain party. So I support it.
So you're comfortable with that. What you're suggesting is a little bit stronger, but you're okay with the way it's worded?
I'm fine with that. I think Councillor Flynn had a good point. If we had all of them, coming every year, that wouldn't be mindful of our time or theirs, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, I think everyone's clear on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Any discussion on the policy as amended? Okay. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks for the discussion on that item. 8.6, agricultural land application, ALC number 379, Balin. We have a motion on the screen. I need a mover and a seconder for that motion to bring it forward for discussion. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, thank you. Seconder for that motion, Councillor Flynn. If I could have staff read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, second by Councillor Flynn, that application ALC 379 be authorized for submission to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, this is called a Section 30 Agricultural Land Commission Act application by the Balins who live on Lakeshore Road Northeast. They actually don't live on the property under application. The applicants live on the property directly west of the property under application. And as you can see on the ortho photo from 2016, about 3/4 of the property is in the ALR, and the southern portion, southern 10 acres or 4 hectares, is not in the ALR. And the application is to exclude 1.28 acres of ALR land, shown on this diagram here. It's a small sliver of ALR, and the purpose of that is to allow for a potential subdivision of the property, to subdivide off the southern 10 acres from the 30 acres to the north. I've been dealing with the owner's agent, Joe Johnson, on this application since around October last year, and it's gone back and forth. It's gone to the Agricultural Advisory Committee, it's gone to the Planning Committee. Being an exclusion application, the proposal was also advertised to the public as required by the ALC Act, and there's substantial public input in your agenda, and a response to that public input by the agent is in there too. An agrologist report was conducted after the AAC meeting in January, and based on the amount of land proposed for exclusion in the whole scheme of things, relative to the amount of ALR land on the property, staff are recommending that this go to the Land Commission.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Cannon.
So just so that I understand it, the ALR land, just that small amount, is what is needed to have access to the part that isn't ALR land.
That's correct.
Okay. And then if successful, the property, you said it was approximately 10 acres, is it?
Yes.
So that's the land that would, if successful, be subdivided.
If the Land Commission approves the exclusion, if the council agrees to send it to the Land Commission, and then if the Land Commission supports the exclusion, then the applicants would apply for an inclusion of this land here to be included in the ALR. So the ALR boundary with this idea would shift from this diagonal line to a straight line going east and then cutting down this way, and then a little jog here. And the little jog here is about 1.2 acres, which is supposed to come, or proposed to come out. So if that is all approved, then I anticipate there would be an application to the city to subdivide off one lot, the southern 10 acres, along the ALR boundary. The proposed ALR boundary, not the existing one.
So a one-lot subdivision, then?
That's the ultimate intent.
The ultimate goal? And would there be any, I mean, if it went that far, is there any, I guess, covenants that there wouldn't be more than a one-house subdivision on that property if they were successful?
Your worship, yes. There would be a covenant required for the subdivision for a relative provision.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just had a question through you to staff. So after the exchange, if it's supported and if the ALC approves it, the remainder piece will be over 4 hectares, which is our minimum in that area. Is that correct?
Director of Development Services?
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Flynn, this remainder 4 hectares would actually meet our zoning bylaw, minimum parcel size for A2.
Okay. And that's after the exchange, which gives more land to the ALR than it's taking away, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And then if council agrees to send this to the ALC, we can't stop it from going to the ALC because that's a direct process. We can forward it with or without support, is that correct?
Your Worship,
Not forward it, but we can say we support it or don't, but they can still go directly to the ALC, I thought.
Director of Development Services?
Your Worship, no, this application has to go through council first.
Okay.
The rules are that exclusion applications go through council, and if council does not authorize the forwarding of them to the ALR, then the application does not proceed.
Okay, that's what I
For
was
inclusion ones, it doesn't matter what we say, they go forward anyways.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And as was stated in the answer to Councillor Cannon's question, is if this goes forward and if we allow it, there would be a covenant on it for no further subdivision.
That's correct. The covenants would basically bind this proposed lot 1 to stay as is, and it would bind the remainder to stay as is with the allowance of 1 single-family dwelling.
Thank you for that clarification. I'll leave my comments till we hear other questions.
Okay, Councillor Lindgren.
Thank you. Just questions about, I think we originally said or originally heard that this would be this new 4-acre piece would have a house on it that would be built for the owner. Is that the owner of the person who might purchase this or for Mr. Balin himself? I didn't realize that he actually already lives next door to the property.
I'll ask the Director of Development Services if he knows the answer to that question.
Your Worship, that was the whole confusing aspect to this proposal as far as I'm concerned. And at the end of the day, the intent is to sell off this 10-acre piece so that somebody can build a house on it.
Right.
There's no building permit for a house on this portion, and there's no house at all on the property.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cannon.
So further to that, if they sold off the 10-acre for a house to be built there, then the remaining property that's ALR, a house could be built and put on that, correct? A single family house. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, just bring to council's attention, I'm sure that you've seen, we did receive some extra information from Mr. Johnson because I wondered about why Mr. Balin decided to go this route instead of applying for direct subdivision, and it is explained in this email as to why they felt doing it this way might be the better way, and I understand the rationale from that letter. I'll open it up for discussion before we vote. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. I will vote in favor of the motion, as I did at the planning meeting. I feel that the agricultural land issue is not ours to decide, but the exchange is more land in the ALR for what is being taken out, and the small piece being taken out seems reasonable. I know that a lot of the correspondence was against and concern about setting precedent in future development. I'm pretty confident that we're talking about property partly in the ALR and partly out of it that will potentially have 2 new homes on it, but the second one probably won't happen until a future application. It's not going to open up a massive development of ALR land, as most of the correspondence against seem to feel would happen. So to me, this makes sense, and ultimately it is the ALC's decision. So I will vote to move it forward.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thank you, Worship. We've had vigorous discussion at the AAC on this, substantial discussion at last week's planning, and so I'm probably going to just briefly review some of my comments from last week. I think on one hand, the lens that I apply is that this is really a small exchange being proposed of AL, non-AR land. I fully get that, and I think that on the one hand is within the purview of the ALC, but on the other hand, I do believe this application goes against our current OCP for acreage reserves. And I think it's an OCP that discourages subdivision and it discourages additional development. And I'm going to suggest this is one of these, and we do see them, perhaps at least from my position, perhaps in a future rewrite of the OCP, this would be appropriate in a scenario. But in my mind, it is a not now situation. The implication of this application is that there will be likely 2 separate properties, and again, I want to thank the applicant for indicating that that's their intent, each of which would have a primary residence plus, and perfectly permissible if it goes, separate accommodations depending on the designation of the property. But really simply put, considering the range of reasonable options for this proposal, I don't want to see any more than 1 residence on this existing footprint of property in the AR. And I don't want to set, and I know that we're very clear at this table about any one application is very unique and doesn't necessarily set precedents for other applications. I fully agree with that, but I do think it sets an impression of precedents for similar agricultural reserve properties in the area. And when it really boils down to it, I feel that the goals and directions of our current OCP trumps the proposal of the application at the ALR that's in front of us. So I will vote against this.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Any other comments before I call the question? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
I know we discussed it at planning, but Your Worship, Councillor Lavery's comments raised the question in my mind. There are currently no residences on this property, is that right? Through you to?
Director of Development Services.
That's correct.
And if it were subdivided, there could be a residence on the non-ALR portion?
Yes, and there could be a residence built regardless anyways.
I see. And so you can put a residence on an ALR property, but only the one?
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Any other discussion? We'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is defeated. Councillor Lavery, Councillor Lindgren, Councillor Cannon, and myself opposed. We'll move on to 8.7. Director of Corporate Services, official mark. There's a motion on screen. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that motion? Councillor Wallace-Richmond moves. Second. I will second that motion. I think to the corporate officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The legal process to designate the city's new brand as an official mark is underway, and one of the statutory requirements is that council officially pass a resolution to use and adopt Salmon Arm Small City Big Ideas as the official mark. Not the city of Salmon Arm per se, but Salmon Arm. And so that is what's required right now.
Thank you. Discussion around this motion. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Your Worship, as our rep on the Community Branding Committee, I have to say this process has been very thoughtful and considered. As we know, it's important to have protection around branding and messaging. There are commercial options, but this official mark under the legislation, I'm not sure what legislation, is actually more cost effective than the more typical corporate way of doing it, which would be a copyright trademark type of approach. It's also offers us greater security in terms of protecting the brand. And so as we know, it's a community brand, a family brand, if you will, with many different iterations of the different groups that have agreed to participate in it. But certainly as a city, this is a contribution we can make to the effort, and it will protect the work that's been done so far and the work that's yet to come.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff and to the Economic Development Society for working with staff. After much discussion about protecting a trademark, which is what we usually think about, as Councillor Wallace-Richmond has stated, this costs less, probably provides more protection, and is easier to do. From staff's point of view, and I appreciate staff's viewpoint, they don't want to necessarily manage this, but we are going to use the EDS to manage this, apply for it, and put the protection in place. So we will have an agreement, I believe, with EDS that says that they will take this on like we have used for the municipal destination tax. So very similar type of agreement where we have to be the ones who put it in place, but we can assign the rights to manage it on a day-to-day basis to the EDS, if I'm quoting those words properly, and just confirm with the Director of Corporate Services.
Director of Corporate Services.
Through your worship, Councillor Flynn is correct. We will put in place an agreement such that the EDS will actually manage it on the city's behalf, but this official mark process requires the city to be the applicant.
And I just would further add that being on that board, EDS has changed their word mark to use this word mark. So has Downtown Salmon Arm, and I believe the Chamber is working on something similar. So the community organizations that were involved in the branding, which has been an invaluable process, are all getting on side, and now we need to protect that.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, just like to thank Councillor Wallace-Richmond for being a part of it and bringing her expertise to this, and also the corporate officer for her involvement. All those in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously. To 8.8, City of Salmon Arm Checkout Shopping Bag Regulation, number 4297. We have a motion proposed. I would be happy to move that motion if there is a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Could I ask staff to read the motion, please?
Moved by Mayor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Lindgren, that council support in principle the checkout shopping bag regulation bylaw number 4297, and that staff be authorized to proceed with the engagement process as outlined in the report dated February 7, 2019.
Thank you. I pass it to staff if there's anything they would like to add to the written piece that we've received. Your
Worship, this bylaw has been brought forward at the direction of council and is largely based on the bylaw that's in existence in the city of Victoria regarding regulating and prohibiting single-use plastic bags. And I think the report spells out what some of the pitfalls may be if council wants to go forward with this. The motion on the floor is not to give any readings to the bylaw, but to start with a public engagement process where I'm sure we'll hear very quickly what some of the issues are.
Great, thank you very much. I don't mind just speaking to this briefly, and then the councillors may want to also add. Of course, this initiative is starting to catch on throughout North America and Canada. Some of you may have read that a group of youths met with the City Council of Squamish last week, and Squamish in turn has moved forward, or are moving forward as we are, with a very similar process. This particular motion is really about the engagement piece, and we do want to hear from residents, we want to hear from groups, we want to hear from retailers on how we can best move forward and make it a win-win for everyone. I have to say I've heard from all of those groups, and I think philosophically all groups are on board who feel it is the right thing. Of course, there's always questions about how it's going to go, and that's what we want to hear about. But it should be noted, this has been successfully done in communities and cities, big and small, throughout the world, and more recently in the city of Victoria. And we have modeled our draft bylaw around theirs. And the process quite similarly around Victoria's. I know that council is aware of the caution that our staff has given us, that presently the City of Victoria was taken to court over this bylaw, and it was decided by the courts that they did have responsibility and that the bylaw was under their jurisdiction. It has been appealed at this time by the Canadian Plastic Bag Association. We don't know when that appeal will take place, and so I'm asking council to move forward. We are a small city with big ideas, and I think regardless of what the courts decide, and Victoria is quite confident that they will decide in their favor, I think it will not affect us a great deal. So if there's any other comments or questions from council, I would open it up to them now. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm excited about this, and I think, you know, when I was on council quite a long time ago, I had the cosmetic pesticide bylaw, which, you know, other communities were doing as well, as we modeled ours on. But I think to make a decision as a community, an environmental decision, I think this is a good road for us to go down. And I think it starts with the process of how we're going to engage the community, and hopefully our community will have the buy-in that we were looking for. But I think to wait until the outcome of the appeal in the courts, I think, you know, you just don't know where that's going to go. I mean, it's already had some rulings already, so I think if we model it on Victoria, then you're not reinventing the wheel. And I think this is the right step for our community. I mean, you look at the stats of how many plastic bags in just really our small population and living on the water. I just think this is the, you know, a responsible road that we're going down. So I totally support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Cannon's comments. I guess I had a question of what the consultation process might mean in folks' mind. Is it going to be a working committee to get input and bring to council? I guess are we going to have a public input session, a range of sessions? Just what is your thinking, Your Worship, on what that consultation process would look like?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lavery, and have initially put a plan together with staff, of course, waiting to see whether this motion would pass today. Certainly, I think all of the above. We would begin and have a letter drafted to certainly to all retailers in town, and also through website, that kind of input. But we also want face-to-face input that would come to all of council, and so those pieces will certainly be a part. I think how we handled the cannabis retail input was a good model to follow, so we'll try to similarly follow that. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to make it really clear, we're not voting on a bylaw. We're not voting on implementing a bylaw. We're voting on a process to get community input. And I think the process is the important piece. I will reserve my decision for whether I feel a bylaw should be implemented till I see a bylaw and get the community input. I agree with all the environmental reasons, but I do want to make sure that the people most directly impacted, which is downtown retail businesses and other retail businesses in our community, are consulted in a proper manner. I think the implementation of a well-meaning or discussion of implementation of a well-meaning panhandling bylaw is a perfect example of well-meaning not really ending up with the result that we all had hoped. So I think this process is extremely important, and I will vote in favor of moving the process forward. I think it's really important that downtown Salmon Arm, the Chamber of Commerce, Economic Development, the people who manage the malls, and all retail businesses be given perhaps even more opportunity than is being discussed here to provide input. I'm not sure that if I'm going to be cognizant of taxpayers' dollars that I want to put in a bylaw that is being challenged in the court, because you could just add our lawyers to that process. So I will determine when the process is completed for information and public input what I will do at that time with regards to any proposed bylaw. But I think this is a good initiative. I think it makes sense, but I think the key is public and impacted parties' input. So I want to make sure the retailers are given proper opportunity to be involved. And I think this process does that.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I certainly appreciate your comments, and a part of packages that will be provided, sent to retailers and to groups, will be this draft bylaw number 4297. We're not going to give the bylaw any readings at all at this time for that very reason, because we want to get their input specifically on the bylaw, and any things that they feel need to be looked at or need to be adjusted. We'll certainly take that into consideration.
And I think I just would add that this is a very challenging time for retail business to start throwing, kind of like the panhandling, to start throwing potential fines at retail businesses in the near future may not be in the best interest of anybody.
And I'm glad you brought that piece up, because of course we have fines in every bylaw, and it's very, very rare that we ever move to that. Of course we would move to education piece first and consultation. We need that in there, as you know, as a very bottom line, but I don't suspect that we will get to that spot. I like to think positively. I think people might come to Salmon Arm to shop because we don't have plastic bags.
Could be right.
So it might be good for retailers. Councillor Lindgren.
Thank you. Actually, I had a question about the exemptions, but I think that on reflection, it's probably better to keep it until we start discussing the bylaw itself. I'm excited by moving towards this limiting our single-use plastics, though, and would support moving forward to the discussion and feedback phase.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. People's major objection to change is typically that they weren't told about it. And so this does that. This starts the signaling process. Of course, the engagement piece is important. I will say what I have seen so far on social media, it's cast a pretty wide net of comments, not just from here, but from other communities. So it's definitely, the signal is out there, and I'd like to see the process move ahead, and I look forward to what happens next.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions before we vote? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Council. We'll move to 8.9, Director of Engineering and Public Works, Downtown Parking Commission minutes, our appointment for Downtown Salmon Arm. And there's a motion on your screen. Councillor Cannon would like to move it. Seconder. Councillor Flynn, thank you. Could we read the motion, please?
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that Council appoint June Stewart to serve on the Downtown Parking Commission as the Downtown Salmon Arm representative for the duration of the current term, which is scheduled to end on February 28, 2020.
Any discussion around that motion? All those in favor? It's passed unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, June. Move to introduction of bylaws, section 9. Again, we have a motion on the screen. It's regarding City of Salmon Arm zoning bylaw number 4311. Goat J, first and second reading, R1 to R8. Is there someone who would like to move that motion? Councillor Cannon, seconder, Councillor Lavery. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the motion to us.
Your Worship, there's two properties under application in a new subdivision just south of Hillcrest School. The orthophoto, as we know, was taken almost 3 years ago. This forest is now cleared, and there's quite a few lots in there. Most of them are zoned R8 for a suite because of the last application, which applied to rezone most of the properties. And then there's 3 left over that are R1, and 2 of them are under application now to go to R8 in order to allow for a basement suite inside the homes.
Great, thank you. Administrator, would you like to formally read the motion? I'm sorry, I skipped over that piece.
Sure. Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the bylaw cited as zoning amendment bylaw number 4311 be read a first and second time.
Great, thank you. I'd open up to any questions from council. Seeing none, all in favor? Passed unanimously, thank you. Move to section 10, reconsideration of bylaws. The first one is City of Salmon Municipal Ticketing Information Utilization Amendment Bylaw number 4304. Proposed motion is on the screen. Is there a mover for that motion? Councillor Lavery, seconder. Councillor Cannon, thank you. Can I have staff read the motion?
Moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the bylaw entitled Municipal Ticket Information Amendment Bylaw number 4304 be read a final time.
Thank you. I'd ask Director of Engineering and Public Works, I believe, to remind us of this bylaw. Sorry if I put the wrong person on the spot. Maybe it's Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, I'll speak on behalf of the corporate officer
Thank
who
you.
authored this report and negotiated the dog control contract with the commissionaires. And this fee-for-service amendment is directly related to that new contract for dog control. And it sets out some proposed fines relative to the current fines and proposed fees for impoundment. And Aaron and myself have been working with the commissionaires, the CSRD, the City of Enderby to try and make this all come together, and Aaron's done an excellent job in getting the contract pretty much, well, it's finalized.
Great. Director of Corporate Services, did you want to add anything? I think Director of Development Services covered it quite well.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Comments from council? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, I want to thank staff for working with CSRD, the commissionaires, City of Enderby, to come up with a solution to our dog control. Interestingly enough, I was ordering some new glasses in a local business in town and ran into a gentleman wearing a commissionaire's sweater and asked him if he's our new dog guy. And he said he was. And he seemed very excited at this opportunity for both the commissionaires and us. But he did ask me if we are planning to put any more signage as to where dogs are supposed to be on leash. And because he said he can't really deal with off-leash dogs. And I guess my question is, when I look at this, it isn't really talking about off-leash dogs. It's talking about dogs running free without any owners around and failure to pick up dog droppings. And I guess as a dog owner who has for a long time had my dog under my control but not necessarily on leash, are there specific parks, and maybe we need to make sure the communication is clear for the commissionaire and for citizens as to what we are asking them to enforce, and how it seemed like he was very enthusiastic about dogs with owners not on leash in parks. but there's very few parks where dogs have to be on leash. Am I correct? And is that really what we're asking them to do?
Director of Development Services or Corporate Officer?
Your worship, I can answer that. We do have certain parks where dogs are allowed as long as they're on leash, of course. We have certain parks where a dog park is proposed, like Klahani. But we have provided the commissionaires with our bylaws and the parks where dogs are allowed and where they're not allowed. So perhaps Bob has not reviewed all of that yet, but I agree things could be clearer in that regard.
Okay, I guess it's a work in progress. I really appreciate all the work that's been done. And it seems like Bob's really excited. I just want to make sure we know what we're enforcing and how we're enforcing it. And not to say that maybe we don't need to look at it to enforce more in the future. But in general, I thought our bylaws were quite specific that there's only a couple on-leash parks. The rest you have to be under the control of your dog, but not necessarily by leash. And I think maybe we just need to remind Bob. I couldn't remember his name, but. Yeah.
Is that the person needs to be under the control of the dog or the dog under the control of the person?
Good question. Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
Your point is well taken, and you're right, it is specified in the bylaw, but perhaps communication to the public could be better. Yeah. Councillor Lavery.
Thanks, Mayor Harrison. A short leash always works on me. I just reiterate Councillor Flynn's comments, and I have to say, and it just struck me the other day, I've seen the vehicle 2 or 3 times around in the past few days. It's a level of presence that we haven't seen before, and certainly the idea of rationalizing this with the CSRD, both in terms of efficacy of service and efficacy of the contract and consistency, is great. So dogs on leash are always issues. We'll have more down the line, but I think this is a great step forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see no more discussion. All those in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously. We'll move to 10.2, City of Salmon Arm Fee-for-Service Amendment Bylaw, number 4303. Pound and Animal Control, final reading. It's connected. I'll ask for mover to this motion, Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Flynn. If staff would read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the bylaw entitled Fee-for-Service Amendment Bylaw number 4303 be read a final time.
Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. This second bylaw addresses additional fees for dogs, and it is also to bring in alignment our fees with the CSRD's fees, because the fees have not been increased in many years, and it will also provide ease of use for all residents in the area and for the commissioner.
Thank you. Any questions or input from council? All those in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. I see our guest, Michael Lavecchio, is in the audience. We will take a 5-minute break till 2 minutes to 4. And then when we come back, we'll have Mike present to us, and we'll move back to informational correspondence after that. Quick break. That's so we can give Mike our undivided attention. Oh, it's his turn.